I don't know where you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are right now. So I'm also happy that we have this fantastic lineup and that we can have a discussion on this quite substantial topic. And it's I will not start with Annie later on because she had already lots to talk in the panel before. But before starting with some topics and some questions, I would like everyone to maybe quickly introduce herself, himself, and then we can start with the discussion. So I don't know who I mean, maybe someone jumps in. No one jumps in?
Okay, I'll start. Hi, my name is Brish. I'm based out of India and I lead strategic sourcing function for Uber. Prior to Uber, I have been with companies like American Express, British Telecom, and Accenture. And my experience is of around 20 years in the supply chain and sourcing domain.
Mm-hmm. It will be very interesting to talk to you because Uber is known very much for disruption. So, I mean, now maybe you disrupt your disruption. let's see where this leads later on. Please, Someone go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Stephanie Benedetto and I'm the Queen of Raw. We are a global marketplace for fashion brands and retailers to be able to buy and sell their unused textiles, keep them out of landfill, and obviously turn what would be pollution into profit. So excited to chat more about it.
But that's a quite bold statement. Cool. Please.
And it's Herman with American Apparel and Footwear Association. We represent apparel and footwear brands, retailers, and manufacturers. So obviously supply chains are critical to our industry.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I'm Shelagh Stoneham. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called WearHouse, and we specialize in weighted wearables. So things like proprietary weighted vests and wrist weights, weighted belts, those sorts of things. We launched the company a year and a half ago. And so prior to this, I was chief marketing officer for a number of large companies like Shoppers Drug Mart, which is the largest pharmacy here in Canada. Before that, Rogers Communications. And then I worked in the US for a while for a women's specialty retailer called Chico's, prior to coming home, back to my hometown of Toronto, although it is a city, and starting this company. And I have a bit of a unique perspective, I think, because I've worked for large companies and now I'm working for myself and my team members, and we are shipping a very heavy goods. And we are onboarding large retailers rather quickly, and yet we're a relatively small player in the marketplace. So our clout is low, but our demands are high.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And then we leave it to Annie. You must be quite exhausted because, I mean, you are talking the whole conference, right?
I've got some water here with me, so I'm hydrating anyway.
Great.
No, I'm super passionate about supply chain. It's something that I think is probably in my DNA. I kind of grew up working in a manufacturing facility, so efficiencies around that and process optimization are really important to me. But anyway, if you haven't heard me yet, I'm Annie Graziani. I'm a 16-year veteran of the fashion industry. More recently joined a technology company called Sunrise Technologies, where we deploy Microsoft Dynamics 365 for fashion, apparel, footwear, home furnishings, consumer packaged goods. And our effort is really on how to optimize the use of modern technology for complex industry like the ones I just mentioned, and particularly complex supply chain. So thank you.
Cool, very well. I will come back to that technology topic because of my history. So just to introduce me shortly, my name is Joachim Hensch, of course, and I have been in the apparel industry for 37 years. I'm quite a dinosaur. And for like the last 25 years, I've been with Hugo Boss. And last year, I quit and I started my own consulting firm. And now I help companies, especially factories, on their way towards Industry 4.0, which means like optimizing, not just doing lean stuff, but doing digital lean stuff and optimizing it. So it's kind of invest into the topic that we have today. And that's why I'm probably coming back to you, Annie, with regard to technology and helping that. So I have a couple of questions here, which I think is quite interesting. And also there will be Rosie collecting some more questions from the listeners. So let's just jump into it. So the first question would be, how has the tremendous growth in e-commerce during the pandemic impacted our efforts to prevent future supply chain disruptions? What weaknesses in the supply chain has it exposed? So who would like to start talking about this? I mean,
I'm happy to jump in. So for the apparel and footwear industry, the e-commerce throughout the pandemic actually became a lifesaver, one of the lifesavers for industry and the resilience of our industry in responding to the pandemic. We went from where e-commerce was maybe 5 to 10% of our business to by the end of the year where e-commerce was 25 to 35% of our business. So basically the progress in e-commerce, we progressed basically 10 years and 10 months because of the pandemic. And so it was a lifesaver for a supply chain. It forced us to finally deal with the issue of how do we deal with inventory in our stores and create a sort of a single inventory scope so that we can take an omni-channel approach where you can order online, pick up at a store, order online, the shipment is from the store. And so it really dramatically changed. It's created also a lot of other complexities on the logistics side of the house where in terms of getting the product to the final customer and having a distribution center set up and a transportation system set up so that we can now send product to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 customers versus to just 100 stores. And that's made it much more complex. So it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm. It's true. So do you think there's enough stuff left for your business, Stephanie?
Yeah, I was just about to jump in. You know, it's true. I think even before the pandemic, we were seeing on estimates around $120 billion a year worth of unused inventory from raw materials to finished goods that obviously traditionally sits in warehouses collecting dust or gets burned or sent to landfill. And obviously through the pandemic, right, there is this crisis of supply, more unused inventory than ever before, because clearly there were the closed stores, canceled orders, and obviously missed seasons and collections. So I definitely think there's been an increase in the volume of unused inventory. But what I hope organizations small to large realize is that that's also a huge opportunity, because that waste, that unused inventory has value, real value, right? And so if we can take that inventory and monetize it, sell it, right, in a marketplace, and we're happy to do that. We do that globally. You're able to take all that money, right, and put it back into doing good work in your supply chains, right? Paying your workers more, fixing some of these breaks in the chain. But what I think is really interesting too is seeing now those opportunities and that unused inventory. You're actually learning about things that didn't work in your supply chain before. And now that you can capture that data, why do I have this waste? Where does it sit? Where does it come from, right? You can, I think, use that data and through some of our software and tools, actually figure out how do I minimize my waste and inefficiencies going forward? And how can I prepare for what inevitably we will have, a future disruption, right? And I think we're just going to be all that more prepared in the future as well. So hope everyone can turn it into an opportunity and we all do better tomorrow.
That sounds great. I mean, talking about understanding the customer, probably Brish, you can add on that, huh? Because I mean, if I remember something really of my travels in the US in the like the early days of Uber, I would always find the Uber would always find me, let's say, as a customer, and that's a great thing. Huh? Talking about e-commerce, also this product finds me. The rest, not so much. I mean, how can we learn maybe from this disruptive thoughts on transportation?
Right. So before I go on transportation, I'll give us an example which may be, close to the apparel industry, and I'll talk about our Uber Eats experience. So during the pandemic, when the rides business was almost zero, because of the lockdown, no one was, traveling. On the other hand, the food delivery business kind of, grew significantly, which we had not expected. And where the link comes is for food delivery, we actually have, those insulated bags given to the delivery partners. They have to collect food from restaurants and, deliver that to the eater. these bags are generally provided by Uber, and we had our supply base in China. So the moment the business started growing and we started onboarding the new delivery partners, we had no bags to give to them because China was literally closed. Even if they had material, they could not ship the material out of the country. So that was a challenging situation we had. Fortunately, I would say we could manage that demand by increasing the delivery time of the food to the people, or telling people that go and just get an insulated bag that you can do. But this was something that we realized, that we cannot be dependent upon just one country. We have to find new sources of it. And during that time, we did explore the opportunities to get manufacturing done in Vietnam, India, and a couple of other countries in Latin America. So that is where we saw that you never know, when everything goes down, suddenly some vertical can come up as the hot cake wherein everyone wants something, right? So this is what we kind of learned. On the transportation side, as I said, a lot of learning came up from the pandemic. When the business was down, we were planning, what are the ways, how do we bring this back to life? What is it that, the riders would need? What is it that the drivers would need? And the first and the foremost thing that came up was safety, right? Whatever we were procuring or whatever was there in the supply chain doesn't matter. The rider wants, a safe drive. So suddenly we saw the supply base changed, or the demand for the new products changed, right? We had masks to be procured and given to every single driver, and we were aware of the risk. It may happen that the rider also does not have the mask, right? So can we put certain masks in the car which can be given to a rider, maybe a one-time effort? So I remember we ended up doing millions of mask delivery from China, India, and a couple of other countries to all parts of the world. So this was really a challenging time for us to bring back the business to recovery by sourcing new kind of items for the first time.
Yeah, cool. I don't know, what is it? Shelagh, right? Shelagh.
Mm-hmm.
Shelagh. Yeah. I mean, you want to add something to that topic?
Well, for us, we started our business with a very solid business plan a year and a half ago, or I'd say I thought it was very solid. Then the pandemic hit and challenged the assumptions we made in terms of who our buyers would be and where our supply chain would be and what actual products we were offering. So we had to pivot in order to build a robust business and to meet the demands of consumers, which are changing so very rapidly. And I'm sure everyone on the call has experienced this sort of thing where the customer is shifting so rapidly, and our supply chains are not just challenged to deliver what we used to deliver, what we plan to deliver, but what they really need now. And that actually helps to keep product out of the landfill. So Queen of Raw, you've always got a lot of product, but we don't want to make it worse inadvertently by not being nimble enough. And that's where I think our supply chains have been, I know for our business, have been challenged, because the original suppliers we planned, they were telling us that we've gone from 6 weeks lead time on production to 7 months most recently. And it hasn't changed. It's just gotten longer. And if you're not a big player, and I'm used to working for really big companies where you're top of the queue by virtue of how important you are in terms of volume, to being a small independent business emerging, but working with very large retailers who are expecting us to deliver enormous orders in a short period of time with confidence. Right? Like we've got Mother's Day promotions, Father's Day promotions, things like that. We're on the front of their flyer. We can't not deliver. And so we're pivoting to deliver what the customer wants on the timing that the retailer needs. Mm-hmm. So we don't blow that relationship. So whatever supply chain we had in place, and we had some great resources in place, they have truly been challenged. And that's challenged our pricing model as well, the economics of our business, which I'm sure we'll get to as well. So I think regardless of what type of business you're in, the kind of offering, has likely has been required to shift, and your ability to deliver against that has been challenged.
Yeah, talking about challenging, Annie. One question was, what business models can build resilience to challenging time? We just heard about eroding business models, changing and moving customers. How can technology and in particular software help here?
I think that we saw some very good successes in the past year as far as, businesses that needed to take a hot minute to kind of stop everything, think clearly for a second, and then basically recalibrate on what their customers' expectations were. So having the confidence of the customer, of the brand that has their back, that can deliver in a reasonable way. Because I do think there's something to be said for setting reasonable expectations across everything that we do, in all of our relationships, including that with the customer. I think that, one of our customers, Patagonia, did this very, very well. And we were there with them to make this happen, which is that they just stopped everything out of concern for their employees and out of concern for their customer, right? Because they just had to take a moment to calibrate. And then what they did is to keep their employees safe while also being able to deliver on expectations for their customers. What they did is they used their stores as distribution points. So by doing this sort of like, in a sense, like democratized distribution, they were able to keep the number of people in the stores relatively low. So therefore, social distancing and safety measures were able to be turned on, but also kind of created some efficiency by getting the product to the customer and the closest proximity to wherever the customer needed it. So this concept of, delivering in a more efficient way, they took full advantage of acknowledging, oh my goodness, we can do something even a little bit better here. So I think that the types of business models that, can build resilience are the ones who are paying attention. And I think that is really, there are many business models who fall into that category. I just think it's about paying attention to, okay, the world has changed. We need to react to it because that's all anyone can do right now. And we need to make the best situation out of what's been handed, the cards that have been handed to us. And they're a great example of a company who said, they had the confidence in themselves to say, let's stop everything for a minute. We deserve it. We deserve, and our customers deserve, and our employees deserve a moment for us to be thoughtful about how we turn ourselves back on. Yeah. So, I think brands who are just doing that, just thinking intelligently about how to bend, how to shift in light of changing times, and to do it, and to not just sort of like find a short-term solution, but something that actually can sustain them for a longer future, I think is really powerful. And I think they're who will be able to, they're building resilience in how they operate.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just
and I guess just to add on that, I guess what is very important here to note is that we are still in the shock waves of this pandemic. Still people are struggling with catching up. Some have already made this progress and already started to do some changes in their business models and adapted to the time when the whole world is vaccinated and we will come to another way of living, however this may look like. But that's very important to see when we talk about business models. What kind of business models will probably have a sustainable future in the next years to come? Shelagh, you want to say something, and then Stephanie. Sorry.
I did very quickly, which is just that when we launched, we had a signature product intended to launch last June, and given the timelines and the pandemic and so on. And supply chain, we weren't able to launch in June. We actually launched in December. But in the meantime, we polled our customers and we offered other products that were highly relevant to them, given they're in lockdown and could work out in gyms and studios and those sorts of things. And in so doing, we built a relevant offering that has since expanded to include our vests and so on, and quite successfully, I'm happy to report. But we built relevancy from day one. And I think the brands that, and I know you know what I'm talking about, you see on TV or you see outdoor boards when they're wearing very formal wear and high heels and those sorts of things, you're thinking, where are these people going? I don't know. I'm not sure. If I were them, I would be pivoting to put my other products further forward, because I think you cannot just not have a depression in sales by not being relevant, but you can actually damage your relationship with your customers, even established customers, because they'll end up going to another brand that understands the reality more and establish new patterns of shopping behavior and loyalty. So I think that there's more than just short-term damage that can be done. It's longer term if we don't figure out how to maintain relevancy. In my case, it was develop relevancy, and then maintain it with our customers and our target customers.
Now, Stephanie, before you start, there is a very interesting adding here, and then you come back. I come back to you. There's one question from the audience, which is: should risk of disruption drive a shift in inventory strategy? If so, what is the risk and reward for customers? Maybe you can put this, because basically you talk about inventory, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, as we're thinking about our inventory and what consumers want and need and what we're making and what we have, right, there's a lot of questions there. But what it is new business models that are coming up, and will bring with them new revenue streams and new opportunities for that inventory, new ways to think about it, new ways to monetize it. And obviously, a lot of this and a lot of my work go back to sustainability, reuse, recirculation. And I think that's powerful opportunities for us to leverage the inventory we already have while doing new things with it and establishing new relationships with the end consumers who care about it and want it. And it's kind of funny, when I first started talking about this issue of unused inventory and waste in supply chains years ago, it was seen as a nice to have, right? But not a have to have. And we would talk to the sustainability departments in businesses, but a lot of times they were newly created positions and they didn't necessarily have a budget or a direction yet, or weren't integrated into the businesses. But I do believe that especially today, right, bringing about meaningful change, it requires the participations of all the C-suites. You need the CMOs who are storytelling around the good work. You need the CIOs and the COOs who are managing the technology. You need supply chain and procurement who are looking at that issue, right, of inventory and data. You need all of them to work together, and the CFOs who are dealing with the waste and liabilities, right? But the good news is, fast forward to today, and if any good can come out of everything that's going on in the world, right, it's that we've woken up to these issues. And I think the latest McKinsey report showed that sustainability, right, it is a top 3 directive for every major organization, and consumers care about, because consumers care and they want it. And so I think our priority today, we've got a lot of inventory out there. So thinking creatively about how we can keep it in circulation, reuse it, resell it, repair it, recycle it. That's critical to surviving today. But then let's take the money that we make there and let's put it into figuring out how we thrive tomorrow. And I think a big piece of that is looking at our data and our technology and how we digitize this information to better serve our customers tomorrow and to know better what kind of inventory we want. And I think all of this begs the question of, what does that future supply chain look like? And I think we are at that tipping point to build for the future where it is more on demand, more local, and more sustainable. And that way we'll be able to drive and deliver better inventory quicker to our consumers in a more efficient and sustainable way. And it makes economic sense.
Yeah, true. I mean, we are talking about the supply chain of the future. Nate, what do you think? I mean, how does supplier strategy need to be different post-pandemic? I mean, how important is the supplier relationship management? And how does this maybe also invest in a new way of thinking about sustainability?
So regrettably, my connection just dropped at that second, so I didn't hear.
So you didn't get the question. So the question was, how does supplier strategy need to be different post-pandemic? And how important is supplier relationship management? And how can we, because people talked, when they talked about sustainability, it was the sustainability department, basically. And we would spend endless hours on talking about the reduction of water for cotton production, but we didn't spend a minute on overproduction, which is the biggest waste and the biggest pollution in sustainability aspects. So what do you think? When you think about the current story, and I mean, Stephanie talked about on demand right now and talking about getting closer to the markets. What do you think how the supply chain of the future has to look like? I mean, how different is this strategy, supplier strategy?
So there's a couple ways to answer that. And so the first is that for our members, for the brands, for the retailers, it really needs to they really need to look at diversifying their supply chain so they can meet these different types of demands, where they have production closer to market so that they can meet this custom on-demand requirements. but also still have their more bulk production, more commodity production as well. And so it requires a much larger diversity of the supply chain. And that is an issue. Regrettably, we are an industry that's overly dependent on China. 2/3 of all footwear coming to the United States, 1/3 of all apparel coming to the United States today are from China. Those numbers are actually down from where they used to be. And what we learned at the beginning of the pandemic is that not only are we dependent on China for the final product, but we're also dependent on China for the inputs that go into that final product. And so even if we have moved production to other countries or to this hemisphere, we still learned that we were getting the yarns, the fabrics, the zippers, the buttons, the soles, the leather soles from China, which meant that we still had major supply chain problems. The second part of this is that the relationship with your suppliers become much more important. Regrettably, what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, where a lot of our members and many other businesses started to freak out and were worried about cash flow, and they were laying off their own customers as retail dropped. And we had in 1 month where retail dropped to over 80% in April from the previous April. They did things that they probably shouldn't have. They canceled orders, delayed orders, did not pay for orders that were already in process or materials already bought. And so what the pandemic has created is a lot of distrust between the buyers and the suppliers.
That's true. Yeah.
And so we're going to need to be working on that. And the suppliers coming out of this, there are going to be a lot fewer suppliers just by virtue of what's happened. And so is the dynamic between buyer and supplier going to be dramatically different coming out of the pandemic, where the supplier ordinarily has little to no power, are they going to have a lot more power? And that plays into our demands on sustainability and other issues, where they're going to say, well, you have to provide us something better. We're not just going to find ways to reduce our carbon footprint or our electricity use or our water use unless you provide some sort of real commitment that you're going to source from us for the next 5 years or things like that. And so it's going to be a much different scenario on all of our conversations with our suppliers going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. With regard to complexity, the two missing people, Brish and Annie, maybe an answer to that. I mean, we all understand that the more we go demand driven, the more complex our supply chain will be, because Nate just talked about the missing trims. And I know by my own, when I was managing director in Izmir last year, I was happy to have the fabric coming not from China, but from Italy, only to learn 1 day later that the zipper was missing in the buttons. And anyway, we had to stop. So it meant nothing, you know. Like if we decentralize and if we get closer to the markets, how can we handle complexity? And again, I know Uber can handle complexity quite well, and of course Microsoft as well. So maybe you two, can you answer a little bit about how can we tackle with technology this kind of complex world that we are going to see? Who wants to start first?
Maybe I can go with it. So I think when we talk about the diversification in our supply chain, one of the strategy that we may have to think is not just look at, what is it that the supplier is supplying to us today. More than that, we have to understand what are the capabilities the supplier has. And I'll give, a quick 3 examples. The first one is Foxconn. Foxconn is known to be an electronic manufacturing services provider across the globe. What did they do during the pandemic? They started manufacturing masks out of China and start supplying to everyone, right? Second example I will give from India. We have, Maruti Suzuki as the largest automobile company in India. What were they doing during the pandemic? They were actually manufacturing ventilators, right? The third example I will give, and that's something which we tried at our end. And it's a real situation wherein, we wanted to distribute the sanitizers and the masks to around 30 plus cities in India. When the whole country was under lockdown, logistics was not functioning. We did not know how to distribute, the material. So we tried thinking differently. We started thinking who are the people or who are the companies who are allowed to operate. One interesting thing that we figured out that, The companies who are into physical security, who are supposed to, take care of, the banks or the ATMs or, the office buildings, they are allowed to move on the road, right? So we reached out to one of the security agencies. We said, you guys are moving your vans across, the roads every single day. Can your van act as a distribution point for, masks and sanitizers? And through our application, we will, direct the drivers to your vans, wherever you are, that actually worked. And the reason why I mentioned these three examples, because when we talk about the diversification, we have to think about the capability of the supplier, what kind of setup they have in their premises, what can be done based on those, capabilities. And that's where the real, simplification would come. Just by thinking that, that I need to have, global suppliers as well as the local suppliers, that may not work every time, because there will be complexities around managing a large supply base. It will be tough on making a decision that how much portion of the business I should give to the local supplier who's slightly higher on price versus, someone say in China or other country who's far off. There is a risk, but I do get price advantage. So, those decisions will always be tough. We have to kind of think about, is just-in-time inventory going to work for us, or do I need to have a vendor-managed inventory next to my, factory? So those are the decisions which have to be taken. Is it always going to work? Answer is no, it may not work. It will be very, very situational. But yes, the moment we start collecting, the data and the learning about every single day, every single transaction that we are doing, with that data, we can build a long-term strategy. But I think we have to spend almost a year to learn every single transaction, how, that happened. So this is how I think.
Yeah, very good point. Which brings me to Annie. Do we have a year for data collection in the future?
I mean, I think it's on.
Do we have a problem, and how can we maybe overcome this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ongoing, and I think that the real thing is that you've got to start with something. You've got to start by improving some part of your digital footprint in the way that's most important to you. I mean, and that, like I said, I think it was in the last session, if that starts by understanding your customer, and that's the first way, and also maybe, let's say, a more approachable way for your business to invest in something there, because the customer is where you need to focus to understand them better, and then how to deliver. Then there's a whole lot of other, background stuff, all this like back-end operations business that can happen to facilitate the learnings that you get just by data collecting, about your customer. So that's just one example. Or maybe it's a workflow thing. So maybe it's like, again, the product that we sell is Dynamics. And so maybe it's like turning on Power Apps or Power Automate, things that help facilitate workflow and approvals just to create some efficiencies in your business processes. There's a lot of that too. Or I don't know. I mean, there's so many small little tidbits of tools that are actually very valuable in bringing insights that start to collect information that help you to operate better. And it will maybe start to reach its tentacles into your back-end operations and find better ways to operate. I think that, to the question, which is, the supplier strategy. I mean, I think that we do rely on various parts of the world that all in the very, very upstream of the raw material supply largely depend on China. But I think the pandemic has proven, also, as I mentioned in the last session, that actually, it matters. Absolutely. It totally matters to have all dependency in one part of the world, but the whole world was disrupted. This wasn't like a local regional thing, right? So it's impacting everything, no matter where it would have been. I mean, and so the one thing that I think that maybe suppliers can do is focus a little bit more. Try not to be everything to everyone, but if you focus on a specialty, something that you're really good at as a supplier, and that's all the way across, right? From a raw material, actually, it's probably pretty good in the raw material supply. A zipper company makes zippers. A button, company makes buttons. I mean, that's kind of specialized. But when you get into the finished goods vendors, there are a lot of vendors who are just trying to capture business because they have to. It's survival, and so they can do a lot of different things. So if the focus is on, you focus a little bit more on the specialty of what it is that you do very, very well, then that carries through. And maybe brands should be doing the same. Maybe brands shouldn't be everything to everyone. There are lifestyle brands for a reason. Okay. And that's okay. But there are too many of them. Let's face it. So, and then you can't have efficiency everywhere because you're just trying to maintain all these different, internal systems and processes that have been delivered to the customer that the customer now expects that you now have to figure out how to maintain and sustain. So, so I think there's a lot to be said about that. The last part of it was about vendor relationships. And I think supplier relationships are everything. I mean, absolutely everything. When it comes to brands depending on suppliers and vice versa, that is, to me, that is one of the most critical parts in business, regardless of the industry, but especially in the apparel industry.
Yeah. So we're talking about relationships also in the next some of the next questions.
Oh, sure.
One thing would be also, on top of my screen, there is I wrote this letter because it's from Y Combinator, and they say their mantra is make something people want and are willing to pay for. Right. And I really love this, because we do so much in our apparel industry that exactly what you just said. Okay, we have 3,000 machines, so let's fill the machines. We fill capacity with stuff, but we are sometimes and even not focusing if we have customers for that. It's just we want to fill the lines and fill all that. And one question would be for Stephanie and Shelagh about, there was one question here which was like, how do small brands with relatively smaller supply chains strategize to build back and regain break even first? I mean, small brands have no big pockets to survive with big inventories.
No, but they actually have a huge opportunity, because in so many ways, the larger brands and retailers, right? They still in certain ways do things the way my great grandfather did in the 1890s, right? With pen and paper, right? They have an old school way of doing things. And in order to innovate, change inventory levels, right? Do things differently, there's a lot they have to go through to do that. And, but if you're a smaller brand or retailer, whether you're, new or just have stayed and wanted to stay small, the lean and efficiencies that you've got internally are so well done that you have an opportunity now to build those new business models and with sustainability and efficiency at your core in ways that a lot of the big brands and retailers can't or won't. And obviously that positions you well to, get through what we're going through today and be one of the next big brands and retailers if you do want to grow. A lot of this to me stems with how we digitize our supply chains, right? And the access to information that we have. And for smaller brands and retailers, you probably have a smaller group who you're working with. You're very aware of what's going on, and you know how to make changes and iterate very quickly. Whereas a large brand or retailer who has a tier 1 to a tier 14 supplier, some of them, to know what's going on at all those stages and figure out how to improve going forward, it's going to take time and resources.
So buying power turns into a burden?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Buying power means like big volumes.
Right.
Turns into a burden.
Exactly. And to what you just said, that quote, right, articulates it so well, is that it has to be something that someone wants. And for large brands and retailers, a lot of them are sitting on things that people may or may not want right now. Whereas for a smaller brand or retailer, you can quickly move and change and react to those changing consumer demands. And when it comes to kind of looking at what the future supply chain, we touched a little bit on this, but how we digitize for that supply chain and build for the future. Annie was talking a little bit about this too. I think that, obviously we've all got this great goal that our supply chains are going to be end-to-end transparent and track and trace from a tier 1 to a tier 14. That's a great goal and a great ambition. But we have to figure out, where do we start on day 1 to get there so we don't get stuck in the mud.
It's rather,
and I think
looking at vision, I'd say.
Right, exactly. That's the goal.
Not necessarily something that you have to achieve, just to go through that direction.
Right. But looking now at things like your unused inventory, your waste, right? That's a great place to start, to digitize information, learn about your relationships with the factories that are holding that inventory, and go up and down the chain from there. So again, that to me is an advantage for the smaller brands and retailers today.
Shelagh, what's your point on that?
Well, I think Stephanie, articulates so well. Building on your point a little bit, Stephanie, is that we have no legacy system. So the big companies I've worked at previously, we were burdened with trying to undo some of what we called spaghetti. We had spaghetti systems, and we had an emergency, we had an issue, and we would just kind of plug it. And then when you look back, you kind of go, where do we get? The other thing is not just legacy systems from a digital perspective, but also legacy relationships and legacy dysfunctional relationships. So, we have got a very clear brand purpose. So this is something else that was spoken about previously is, should brands be all things to all people? No, and I think that's when they often get into trouble is there's a diffusion of an understanding of the role that a brand plays in a customer's life. Our brand is all about helping customers get more to their existing workout. We're not trying to change anyone's workout. We're just trying to get them so they look down at and go, you know what, I burned a lot more calories, I built more muscle, whatever. The point is getting more of your workout. So everything fits that. If it doesn't fit it, we don't have it in our staple. From a supplier perspective, we vet our suppliers really carefully from the values perspective. Are we on the same page? Are they nimble? And we're very clear about what our brand mandate is. So we can't offer them what big brands offer. So we can't offer the big volume, but what we can do is we can offer them opportunity. So building on again, another point that was previously made, which is giving suppliers an opportunity to branch beyond their existing offering. Because for us, we can give them more volume and therefore become a more valued partner if they do more than one thing for us. So we have some suppliers that are branching and expanding in ways that make their business more stable because it's more diversified. The other thing is we are very close to our customer and pulse the customer of what they need. So for example, could we produce yoga mats and offer those? Sure, we could. But based on our knowledge of our customer, those who wanted them probably have them by now, right? If they're working out from home. Why would I source 100,000 yoga mats to offer when there are lots of other people that offer those sorts of things?
In case someone needs one, like this.
So we're just, what we're trying to do is create something that's offer something that is unique and tangible and different, and to the customer with visibility right through to the manufacturers. And those processes that aren't necessary, we're not implementing.
Very good, Nate.
It's a clean slate. Now, I have to say, and with all due respect, we're still learning as we go, and I'm sure there are lots of things we're going to want to undo a year, 2, 3 years from now. But as I said, unburdened by legacy, and what we offer to our vendors is quite different than perhaps that others can offer. And we're leveraging.
So that's a hope for me, also from my side, that beyond managing a crisis, that we really change the game here and not just wait until it is over and just start going back to old mentalities. Nate, you touched this topic of trust.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, Shelagh?
I was going to say the thing is, just one point which we haven't really discussed yet, but I think it's important to note is that customers aren't going to go back to their old habits.
Yeah, true.
So nor can we go back to our old habits.
Yes.
We've established in the long the pandemic goes, and we're building emergency hospital extensions here in Toronto now because the next wave of the virus is coming through. So we're in lockdown, but we think that those measures are going to be even more extreme as the next wave of the variant comes in. Customers are establishing brand new habits. And so even if we thought, our digital is good enough, our e-com is good enough, things are just good enough, and putting Band-Aid solutions in place, I would suggest that perhaps good enough is not going to put us in great stead, because customers' expectations with the Amazon effect and so on are that much greater, and they're not going to go back.
True. Nate, coming to you, talking about Nate, can you hear me? Yes, okay, great. So you touched the point of trust. I mean, if we have learned something really in this crisis is that what used to be called relationships between brands and buying departments and factories and something, it all went bust. And there were lots of former family statements and relationship statements which just crashed because everyone was protecting his own cash, basically, and cash flow. So thinking about trust in such a, I mean, we are thinking about the supply chain of the future, which is maybe more decentralized, more close to nearshoring in different ways. How can we build trust in a world which is probably so much faster So we cannot have like merchandisers and buyers building a relationship over 20 years and then trusting each other.
So communication obviously is the key, and I know everybody gets tired of hearing about communication, but the issue is a lot of the problems that were created at the beginning of this crisis last spring and last summer would have been avoided if there was just communication and people said, we're going to have to do this because of this reason. We're going to try and mitigate it down the road, but you're going to need to give us some time. Just a basic statement like that would have maintained a lot of those relationships that were ruined because of the pandemic. And so it really gets back to the basics. You just need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to communicate with your supplier. Your supplier needs to communicate with their workers, and everybody just needs to have full information what's going on. A lot of people hesitated during this crisis because we were learning something new sometimes every hour, if not every day. And so the situation was changing and evolving. But even with that, people recognized that they were all living through it. And so the communication is really, really critical. It also is critical that within a company, all the various departments need to be talking to each other.
Yes.
And this, again, the pandemic really laid bare how little communication there is between sustainability, sourcing, supply chain, product development, design, merchandising. And so really trying to build up those relationships, even internally, would make a huge difference. So everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what's happening. And so people can raise the flag if there's a problem before the problem gets too big. And so I'm going to just stick with communication as the key.
Yeah, it's probably, it's very true that a lot of people talk, but communication is something different, like transparency. And I have a question for Brish, because I was just thinking about, there was one question which is very much about sustainability procedures and standardization. And I was thinking about Uber in that moment, because, you deliver, as also other brands like Microsoft also, but you deliver something like a standard expectation from transportation, no matter where. You are, for me, like when I go to McDonald's, wherever in the world, I know how a hamburger or a quarter pounder will taste like. What is the taste? It will be the same. So, and if I go if I take an Uber car, no matter where, in which country, I have a certain expectation, and you make sure that this happens. So if we think about the supply chain, and if we think about like sustainability procedures and audits and all this stuff, how do you make sure that you build this and create this, that people build trust, and that you don't need like 10 different standards, but you have this one standard? What do you do as a brand?
Great. So I think one of the thing that helps us enabling, this part of trust building is definitely the technology and, the knowledge sharing that we do, and the closed loop team that we work upon. And that actually comes with a lot of empowerment. That is a part of the culture. So we are actually, okay, how do I say it? Okay, for example, if I'm doing something in, say, my region, and I think if that is working well, that is something which is communicated to the other part of the business also, or, my colleagues in the other region, saying, this is something which I see is working pretty well in my area. So do you think this can work better for you? This is one way how we kind of, communicate with each other. And apart from that, as I said, we have kept the technology quite standard across, the globe. While we think global, we still go local and understand, what is it that people demand or expect from us when they are, becoming our customer or taking a ride or, asking for a food delivery. So that learning comes and is being shared across, the globe. So the good part here is that the teams are quite closely looped with each other to share this knowledge. And apart from that, I think we have been working on, the collaboration tools right from day one, because I think the model for us was we wanted to run on a asset-light model wherein people use technology for each and everything, be it, sharing knowledge with each other or, kind of, solving the problems jointly. So those kind of things have been helping us in giving the same sort of experience across, all parts of the world as such. So, for example, if we talk about safety standard remains same across the globe. If you are in country A and if you need to talk to the driver, we'll ensure that your identity is safeguarded, your number is not shared with the other part. If it comes to conducting the background check of a driver, it is a standard practice that we have across the globe that every single driver has to go through the same set of safety norms before they are onboarded. So this is how we have been driving the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well. So it's a mixture of like trying to deploy standard expectations and standards, at the same time acknowledging the differences in culture and local areas. That's a very interesting answer to that. So Annie, with regard to transparency, how can software or how can technology help in this transparency? Like Stephanie talked about this vision of this super, which I also would love to reach at one point in time, that we have an absolute closed chain digital copy of the relationship between the customer and the product. How can technology build on this future supply chain? Because we have less than 10 minutes left just to tell them that. I will quickly ask everyone about this.
Yeah, so this is a tricky question because transparency is dependent upon, the accuracy, just like anything actually, the accuracy of the data that's inputted into whatever tools you decide to use. And I mean, at very least, for the product that we service or that we deliver, at very least, you have traceability of everything. You can track everything that's going on from an organizational standpoint, all your buying and selling, all the costs, all the BOM details, all the customer detail. I mean, you have the ability to track to whatever degree necessary, and then to sort of slice and dice that reporting in any way necessary. Outside of that system, you have things like what the SAC has been developing, the HIG index, that allows also to bring a different layer and a different metric to transparency and traceability, all the way back to the fiber, to the human component. I mean, there's all different sorts of ways that part of the bottom line is being tracked also. So I think that, the fact that the HIG is dependent on technology, also on the inputs and the quality of the inputs and the accuracy of that. And honestly, the very transparency of it is, how honest the information is, right, is really important. But the other part of it is, in actuality, how are the raw material vendors and the spinners and the sewers and all that, how is that also being tracked? So technology is where you can capture that, because again, it's all about data and capturing all of that. But also the nice thing about data is, and this goes back to the conversation that was about sort of like communication, right, that Nate was pointing out too, when you can communicate inside of an organization using the power of technology to basically make real the situation from the single source of truth, regardless of what the perspective is or what the use case is for that, for whatever dependency there is on that data, you're bringing more honesty to it. And it's less subjective, it's less opinionated, it's fact, it's there, it's real.
Which is threatening, by the way.
What's that?
It's threatening because there's typically everyone has a buffer, in his pocket. And with transparency, there's no buffer. It's gone.
Right. It's not honesty. So, it's refreshing. I will say, I feel that it's a refreshing kind of view of how we operate as an industry.
So as we get closer to the end, there was one question, and I would like to maybe everyone can make a final statement also to that, is outsourcing versus reshoring. Has COVID-19 changed the conversation? So is this something that, if we think about the supply chain of the future, what do you see? Is this more like a better organized global? Is it local? Is it more nearshoring? Is it a blended situation? What do you think about the supply chain of the future? And maybe we start with Shelagh. No, you're on mute.
Beg your pardon. It's a great question. Here's what we do know. We do know that in order to have a healthy, sustainable business, we have to satisfy the customer demands. The way through for a lot of brands is selling through retailers or D2C. There's a hard stop. You have to deliver against what they're looking for. In terms of sustainability, in terms of price, in terms of timeliness, in terms of quality. the standards are just increasing as time progresses. And so in order to deliver effectively against customers' needs and to be a favored brand, I think we need to have a plan A and a plan B for just about everything. And so I'm not sitting on a fence, but I am saying local, it's a bit like air shipping, right? Air freight. It's expensive, but sometimes you just got to do it versus ocean freight. So I think it's probably a blend of both. And I would suggest that we'd all like to make it a little simpler. I just don't think in order to be realistic, we can have a one size fits all vendors for our various products.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Stephanie?
I agree. I do think it's going to be a blend of kind of global and local, but I think to the challenges of things being local, which we often hear, right? It costs more. There isn't the expertise or the labor that we need. The more that we come together with consortiums and partnerships, the lower those costs come, and the more demand there is, the more the skill and the labor will grow there, right? So I think we're at a unique tipping point right now and an opportunity to establish these groups and consortiums locally. We're part of one in New York City called the New York Circular City Initiative. And we've produced with H&M and Unilever and Cisco this white paper showing how much money will be made and how many good jobs can be created by New York City going circular in the coming years, while also respecting COVID-19 recovery relief. And I think the more we think that way too, will be a combination of those local and global, but the more that we do that, we'll see massive opportunities and revenue streams and that we never thought before. So I'm positive for the future.
Thank you. Positivity is good. Brish, Nate, and Annie, 1 minute each, because then we're up.
So I think I'll talk slightly different on supply chain of future. While the blended model would be the one which at today's time we should be thinking of operating, but it will be very, very dynamic. But I think what would be required is how much is our supply chain digitized. So technology will play a bigger role as we look at how blockchain is now coming into the processes. So that is where I see things will be different in future based on blockchain. And I know cryptocurrency could be the mode of payment, right? Who knows?
Thank you. Nate?
I would have to say I agree with all my panelists here that it will be a blended approach. And it's a blended approach not only is looking at the final product, but also the materials that go into that product. Because many of the problems with nearshoring is that the materials are still coming from the same place. And so you need to be looking at that. But also I agree that digitization and using other technologies will change the dynamic significantly and make it so that we can still be global because we have dramatically shortened the supply chain using technology.
Super. Annie, talking about technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, along with this, the global approach that this world that we've been living in for so long, we put so much emphasis on the negativity of it and the risk of it, but actually there has also been a lot of positive. There's been a lot of positive to society, and societies all around the world. It has flattened our world. That's arguably good or bad, I suppose. But I do think I'm with everyone else, I think, who has also shared the idea that it's probably going to be a blend. It's going to take a long time. We have to reshore those, the talents that it takes, and also the resources that it takes to produce in a more local way. And that's local, not just being like selfish to the United States, of course, and our demand and our approach to capitalism, but the whole world, kind of going more local. I think it's going to take a long time. I'm also hopeful. I'm also positive. I think that there are brands who are doing it. But there is dependency on offshore. Raw materials as well. So it's just, what is it going to look like? I don't know. I think it's going to change a lot, but I don't think it's going to happen overnight. It's going to take a very, very long time for a lot of different facets of what that means to kind of, adjoin to make it be something that is affordable, realistic, and possible for our future.
Thank you very much for the comments. And my only hope is, to add on that, is that we don't need another crisis to actually move. No matter what, I hope that we are smart enough to move this time and not go back to, as Shelagh said, there is no way back. It's just way forward. Thank you very much.